Hi, I'm Kevin Klein of the Winnipeg Sun. Joining me is no stranger to you or to readers of the Winnipeg Sun, Mr. Marty Gold. Marty, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm glad to be here with you.
I wanted to have you here because I've been following your stuff like so many others. And a lot of people have told me, they're really enjoying your approach to covering some of the things going on within the city of Winnipeg and uncovering items and really talking about things that mainstream media just doesn't want to talk about. They want to, they have their
Uh,
own agenda. You have a different agenda. You have a normal agenda, I would say. Um, I want to talk to you about the recent kangaroo court, sorry, city council meeting, which is somewhat the same thing to me, about the malls and corridors and the zoning changes and how long it went on. Tell us about what happened in your experience.
what happened in my personal experience, I didn't go to the meeting to cover it for the
Right.
Winnipeg Sun to do a podcast about. Um, I have been in St. Boniface for over a decade. I think there's a lot of issues, neighborhood issues here that are not being represented. And I, more generally, because of the work I've done recently with the Sun, as well as over the years with the podcast, I'm concerned about what happens to people when all of a sudden you've got a lot of big trucks and construction and digging and a disruption in the peace and quiet of the neighborhood. And there's a lot of builders out there that evidently don't follow the minimal rules the city has. So I want to make sure that the voice of the people was heard by council as they discussed adding, in effect, more infill, even if it's on McPhillips or Main Street or St. Andrews, St. Mary's. It's still infill, generally speaking. So I went and I watched, and I've been going to council for many years. I discussed it in my upcoming column in the Sun, how hard it was for me to register. Uh, the meeting itself dragged on for 15 hours. It took 10. One guy waited. One presenter waited like 10 hours by my count to speak. And just the conduct of the meeting, where there's so many questions asked of Hazel Boris, the planning director. I, I'm I'm not clear why this was being pushed through with so many open questions and things that weren't done correctly, including the public consultation, which is an obvious failure because the gallery was empty and these are important matters. So a lot of it was inside baseball, and I'm not the biggest expert on planning and infill and such things. I've developed some expertise lately, but I see still to this day dysfunction in council. It hasn't improved since Bowman's day. I mean, it might have behind the scenes, but the conduct of the meeting, there was some friction there. I mean, some councillors didn't seem like they wanted to be there, uh, and maybe they don't, but they're supposed to be stewards of a big corporation here. They're 23 million in the hole, and they're looking, I'm sure, to try to recoup some of it through development fees and such things. But it's impossible for the average person to understand the bylaw and to represent their interests towards it. And the counselors, they're the judges on the case. You said a kangaroo court, so they can't represent their constituents very well either, in my opinion.
So let me ask you this. I talked to John Withrop, a gentleman who works with a lot of planners earlier today, and we were talking about, the housing and the Housing Accelerator Fund. This whole thing is just to get some money that may or may not come from the federal government. And oddly, I have written a lot about it in the Winnipeg Sun, and I have challenged the mayor, and I continue to get the same political spin back. We have, this many, it's all 12,000 units. So, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, we got a letter at the Winnipeg Sun, an email from the housing minister's office, the federal housing minister, just talking about all the great things that have been happening in Winnipeg because of the Housing Accelerator Fund. So I, of course, passed that off to my friend John, and I said, John, how are these projects coming along? You're a developer. You would be able to judge that better than I. Nothing. Nothing's there. They're empty. It's empty lots. There's nothing happening there. This is all smoke and mirrors. So you also have Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the opposition and somebody who could win the next election and become our prime minister, who has already said on record, listen, when I get in, the Housing Accelerator Fund money is not going to happen. You're not going to get any of it. We're going to do different things. And he pointed to Winnipeg as dysfunctional. He said to the national media that Winnipeg is a prime example just how bad the Housing Accelerator Fund is. Did you witness that chaos when you were at City Council?
No, they listen. It's 122 million It's about 30 million a year. It's a drop in the bucket, but they're all in on this. The biggest problem I have with this, besides the fact it's all political theater, okay, you don't have the 1,000 houses built over 3 years and that 7,000 are going to be infill. That is absolute chaos in neighborhoods. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to this, although I didn't get into the minutia of those details. This is going to have a lot of reverb in people's lives, and a lot of excitement's being built up. But I don't see A, that you should have 7,000 infills in 3 years, and B, nobody's addressed where the labor is going to come from. So a lot of this is political theater. How much of it? I think there are some projects that could go ahead. You could fill in places on some of these major roadways, the transit. Some of that's not bad, but I warn council, it could turn into blockbusting where you've got stretches like on Marion or on Goulet or on McPhillips where you have, 1-story, 2-story buildings, the butcher shop, small grocery, stuff like that, where there's going to be the market pressure. All those businesses that make up the character of a neighborhood are going to be taken down. Actually, one of the councillors raised that, I think it was Russ Wyatt, but I reinforced that point in my own experience. There's a lot of change for political gain. I'm not down with that.
Okay, so let me put it this way. If the city was so strongly bent on dealing with the housing issue, why has it been 11, 12 years for Parker Lands to get going? And they're still not developing yet. They're still waiting for approvals because you know what? The 24 million, 25 million that they're under, Parker Lands would be $30 million in property taxes. So why, like you said,
well, obviously
why
we
this
know.
gate?
Well, because the planning department is legendary for being, in the minds of some people, not just developers, rogue actors. There's a certain kind of agenda inside City Hall. Here's what's happening: is the tail's wagging the dog, because a lot of these departments, they have their own philosophies, whether it's urbanist or however you define it, and it's up to the politicians to rein it in. Instead, the politicians, in many cases, are being led by the nose. Parker Lands should have been done over years ago. The city still has no contemplation. Jeff Prawati was unaware of the financial implications when the expropriation bill comes due for the retention ponds. You think the city's short money now? Just wait if it comes out as what is being projected. The councillors never had a grasp on this, or they would have reined in the rogue actors. They would have fired some people. This would have gotten done. I mean, I didn't like the dog leg in the first place. That's all in the past. But if you're going to get this done with that kind of housing and that kind of commitment by Andrew Marquez, and it's the disrespect for the business minded that also comes into play here as to what went wrong with Parker Lands.
Okay, Marty, one final question. I got to get going. Did you feel they listened to the residents?
Well, you had three developers appear, two or three. There was 3 women that appeared by Zoom from Glenwood, which has been hard hit by infill. There was like 2 other presenters that I think were basically walk-ins. The issue is the residents weren't there. So they didn't hear from the residents. It's because the public consultation failed. There were no leaflets dropped on the streets, like in the neighboring streets, like off St. Anne's or McPhillips, where people could be affected by this, or to the businesses, the stakeholders on those streets. Oh, we couldn't drop leaflets. Oh, we couldn't do digital ads because that's too sensible to try to communicate to people through Twitter and through Facebook. The other thing they did is, well, the rule mandates that we do this and that, like community newspapers, and notices, but only in one newspaper.
Yeah.
How many people are reading the Winnipeg Sun now to follow civics, to follow City Hall, to insight that you have and other people, totally different voices, but they only put the ads in a certain other newspaper. So they undermine public participation by the way that they did this outreach. And the pop-ups were a failure because 123 people in 4 days for 3 hours a day is 10 people an hour. I'd get fired if I did my job like that. Instead, you have people in the planning department that are patting themselves on the back. So they didn't hear from the public because the public doesn't understand the implications of taking the councillor out of the zoning and planning and enactment of new builds and leaving it entirely in hands between builders and developers and the bureaucrats. So, no, they didn't hear from the residents. Did they listen to me? I don't know that they had much of a choice. After 40 years, I'm pretty respected. There was a lot of engagement from the councillors. I'm satisfied they realized that I represented the voice and the concerns of thousands of Winnipeggers. And I think they did recognize that.
Good. Thank you, Marty.